I wanted to start out by taking a poll to just see what my audience is. So I call this a body poll. So you're going to have to answer this question using your thumb when I say go. And the question is really a question about rebellion. So I want to, so it's either, this is all up, this is all down. So this is, I'm here to try to learn how to overthrow the government. See, you're rebellious. I said, when I say go. This is, I'm here to get an eye to figure out who the rebels are so I can suppress them. And then this is, I'm not sure about that Snowden guy. Could be good, could be bad, right? Ready? Go. Well, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I think we average about here, okay? So now remember back when you were 18. How did you feel back then? Ready? Go. Okay, so a lot more ups. So that follows the general rule. There's many, many versions of this sort of joke about how if you're 18 and you're not a communist, or if you're not a rebel, you have no heart. If you're 50 and you're a rebel or a communist, you're an idiot. There's different versions of that, but we tend to become more conservative and less rebellious as we get older. But I find that in this kind of company we find, and obviously John and others have selected the rebels, but I do want to talk about rebellion. So actually half my life ago, 24 years ago, I met Timothy Leary. He adopted me as his godson, which I wasn't exactly sure what it meant at the time, but it meant that we were going to hang out and do things together. But he's, to me, I had many mentors, but he was my rebel mentor. And Tim was pretty amazing. The thing that he taught me was a phrase that I continue to use as my mantra, which is question authority and think for yourself. That's what I try to do at the Media Lab. That's what I try to do in my own life. But it's actually pretty hard. I remember being on a stage like this with Tim, and we were at one of those new age sort of hippie conferences that he would do for money because that was still his sort of following. And then there were all these kids, and he would be talking on, and then they came up afterwards and said, so what should we do next? And they said, think for yourself. And one thing that's really, really difficult, I found, whether you're talking about education or giving a talk, is to actually get people to think for themselves and question authority. And I think that rebellion's slightly different, but I think there's a very important connection between sort of free thought and then this notion of rebellion. And as John and I know, in Japan, being obedient is really kind of a very high art. And I think in America, you have kind of a history of rebellion. But another thing I'll say, just sorry about this one picture, if you notice the one before for 1 second, is that he's smiling, right? He's being arrested and he's smiling. He loves it. This is when he got framed for having marijuana. And his mugshot, he's smiling because he loved rebellion. He loved rebellion so much that he smiled all the way to jail. He smiled all the way breaking out of jail. And whenever I saw him, he broke out of jail at the age of 50 with the Weatherman Underground, and then gets kidnapped by the Black Panthers, and then the CIA grab him and extradite him. It's just an amazing life. But anyway, the point though is that rebellion is fun. Okay, and I think that if you read, actually, John Markoff was telling me about Stuart Brand's diary, and he was trying to get some insight into sort of the politics of the time, and it's all about the girls in his diary and all about the drugs, And so rebellion, I think you can go back in history, but doing yoga during the Occupy movement, or so I think one thing we have to admit is that, of course, we do it for a lot of reasons, and it's very important in the politics and all that, but young people often rebel and protest because it's fun. Let's see the next slide. So I was lucky enough to visit Tunisia just a few months after their overthrow of the government, and it was a lot of fun, and we had a big party, and it was this really amazing feeling of being in the Middle East during and after the Arab Spring, and when you remember that scene in Tahrir Square where everybody sort of showed up, and but as a sort of internet guy, I also thought about and talked a lot about the role of the internet in these protests. And even recently, as with Hong Kong, what you find is that we have a very amplified ability to mobilize people, especially to just go out onto the street and show solidarity in a movement. Now, what we find, and I was actually talking to Ethan Zuckerman, one of my faculty, just yesterday about this. It's interesting because you don't need as much preparation for these protests, and people can kind of casually come out. So the protests happen more quickly. It's actually easier, especially when they're unprepared, like in Tunisia, to overthrow these governments. Now with Syria and others, they're more prepared. But what you find is that in the more pre-social media revolutions and protests, it took years and years to get these things prepared. So by the time you actually had the thing and overthrew the guy, you still had this network of people that were pretty organized. The problem right now, if you look at Occupy, if you look at the Chinese recently in Hong Kong, they don't, they just, hey, tweet, let's all show up at the square, and they're there, they don't have a message, they don't know who's in charge. And so in an interesting way, this ability to mobilize very quickly, and I hate it when people talk about slacktivism, because it's not that, it's just different, right? And I think that we've now increased the ability to engage people in protest, but we have decreased the ability, or not decreased ability, but made it so that the structure isn't necessarily in place to follow through. So that's something that we need to think about. But to get back to this sort of theme about fashion and fun and rebellion, I mean, this is one of my favorite pictures. But the really important thing is that Smith's shirt, right? I think a lot of it was, before we had Twitter, we had music. And music was really kind of this thing that helped pull this together. I mean, this is actually a more recent picture, but this idea that it's kind of cool, this whole punk rock movement. And I even have program offices. I'm on the board of the Knight Foundation. And at the Knight Foundation, it's kind of code, like, oh, that's cool. I mean, the code word is, oh, that's punk rock. And it's kind of interesting to see, like, foundation program officers and neckties saying, oh, that's punk rock, to mean that it's cool, right? And so you think about the sort of the whole punk rock movement, and this is, but it gets very close to fashion. And what's interesting is almost immediately when something is rebellious, you look at the art scene in New York, this sort of constant fleeing from the gentrification by the hipsters and this kind of chase after them, and this relationship between sort of rebellion and fashion. And it goes all the way up to where grunge is haute couture, right? And this quote I found particularly interesting, because this is a David Byrne quote. I go into a gallery now, and rightly or wrongly, I immediately think of inoffensive tchotchkes for the billionaires and museums they fund. And this is actually kind of an interesting overall narrative, actually, which is, the relationship between sort of the rebellious artists and I know Paula can talk more about this later, but and the people who fund them have always been a little bit at odds, right? Because you've got these billionaires or the patrons of the time who are basically the man, funding those people who are the rebels. And increasingly, and the argument is right now that Dave and others are making, is that there used to be a sort of middle-class patronage of the arts, but it's becoming less and less so. And so that the artists have this necessity to appeal to these patrons that are even more rich. And so there's this sort of fundamental historical inconsistency, but it's kind of getting amplified. And I think this is sort of a key element about rebellion, which is, we all kind of like rebellion because it's cool. And we remember, it reminds us of our childhood, and it feels good. But who pays for all of it, and how does it build itself into the system? And that's what I think a lot about. I just got back, the last 2 days was the MIT Media Lab member meeting. And so we have 80 companies ranging from Lockheed Martin to Fox to all kinds of companies who come, and we have about 700-800 people, and we do this huge show where we have all the demos, and all of our students are giving demos, and sometimes it feels a little bit like the David Byrne thing. We're sitting there. One of the criticisms that a student had when I first joined the lab was, it kind of feels like I'm working on another Sharper Image catalog every day, but I really want to change the world. And to me, this sort of corporate sponsorship of research also has that same problem, because these kids, these 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, they're rebels, and I have to sit them in front of, nothing against Lockheed Martin necessarily, but they sit in front of Lockheed Martin, and we're just sitting around saying, well, but I want to change the world. I want to deploy, like, consumer products, and we were like, Lockheed, like, do you guys ever make anything in, like, consumer, like anything more than 1,000 units? They go, well, we make more than 1,000 missiles, So that's their consumer product. But the thing is, if you're a rebellious kid, it's a really difficult conversation to sit around and try to talk to the chief innovation officer of Lockheed Martin. Turns out he's a really cool guy, and he's also kind of a rebel. But anyway, to get back to this, I think there's always this interesting natural tension between the system, the man, and rebels. And as the director of the Media Lab, I think about that a lot. I think there is kind of an important way to frame this. I have principles at the Media Lab. My rebellious faculty don't agree with all of them, but I like them. But one of them, I always, one of my favorite ones is disobedience over compliance. And disobedience or rebellion is slightly different, but I think it's kind of similar. And the way I explain it is that you don't get a Nobel Prize for doing what you're told. You get a Nobel Prize for questioning authority and thinking for yourself. But somehow we've created an educational system that requires you to have the right answer, to be obedient, and to kind of do things the way everybody else does them, because that's the way you're supposed to do it. And I think when you start to think about systems, I think it's really important. And anti-fragile is the word I love. I don't know if you've read the book. You just read the beginning and get the sense of the world. But Taleb in this book comes up with a pretty interesting concept, which is that fragile is something that breaks under stress and is not that robust against chaos. But he argues that robustness and resilience isn't the opposite of fragile, because robustness and resilience is basically inert against chaos. It survives chaos. And so he comes up with this word anti-fragile, which I find kind of interesting, which are things that get stronger when they're stressed or when they're attacked. Okay? And there are systems like that. If you think about, say, the immune system, right? So the immune system, the more it gets attacked, as long as you don't die, the stronger it gets and the smarter it gets. And I think about network security. I think that the hackers and all the problems that we have with network security are all ways that we are learning how to get stronger. If you take a kid and you raise the kid in a clean room with no bacteria, the kid will be so fragile that the minute the kid walks out of that room, they'll probably die. And so that stress is really important. And our bodies are set up that way. I mean, there's a theory that fasting, even though it does burns cells in your muscles and stuff like that, there's a theory that it actually sends and burns those weak cells. And so maybe it's actually good to fast because you're getting rid of things that should be gotten rid of and makes you more robust. So thinking about anti-fragile, I think you need to think about all systems, whether it's government or education, about how, because the world is complex, the world is stressful, and if you try to eliminate all rebellion, all stress, you come up with a relatively fragile system. This is a famous quote. I think everybody probably has seen this. But this is Thomas Jefferson to James Madison in 1787. I hold it that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and as necessary in the political world as storms in the physical. And I think Thomas Jefferson said something about, overthrow the government every 30 years or so is a good thing. And so at least, not all of them, but at least Thomas Jefferson felt that, rebellion was necessary to have some kind of change in the government, and that's the way the framers thought about it. Unfortunately, that's not how it is today. I'm kind of picking on the NSA and the Federal Reserve for a minute, but all of government, anywhere in the world, is sort of in this phase right now, which is, it's about stability. We don't want revolutions. And in fact, when you think about monetary policy, we don't really even want fluctuations. What we want is we want stable growth, so people invest and people feel safe. But again, these are all economic theories, and economic theories are worth as much as economic theories. And the thing about economic theory, though, that's quite interesting is that it turns out if you solve for stability, you're likely to create all kinds of pockets of instability, like housing bubbles and other things. And that sort of holding the fort and being stable is not necessarily a long-term, so it's kind of, a lot of it has to do with the time horizon in which you're solving, but it turns out that it's very difficult to build a robust or even an anti-fragile system just focusing on trying to keep something safe and secure. And when we think about the fact that now we have anti-money laundering laws, we know, the world may seem scary, but we know more about what's going on in the world than we've ever known before. And I would say that most real rebellions, real overthrow of the government kind of rebellions, you can't do those unless you can move money around anonymously. I mean, it's almost impossible to mount an attack on your government with massive forces without lots of money going around anonymously. So we're kind of in a world where we, at least in the developed world, we can suppress what is traditionally called rebellion, right? So what we need to do, though, is I think we need to create systems that are anti-fragile, that are rebellion robust, rebellion anti-fragile. So at the Media Lab, what I want is I want everybody to disagree with me. I want everybody to be able to talk about it. And I want every conversation about the fact that they disagree with my 9 principles to make us stronger. And I think what's important as a leader of an organization where we're trying to get Nobel Prizes and trying to come up with creativity is I don't want obedience. I want rebellion as a key sort of factor. And then the last point on this slide I wanted to talk about was this one, learning over education. I'm a little bit biased here because I dropped out of college 3 times and got kicked out of kindergarten. But I don't really like the word education. Education feels like something that people do to you, and learning is what you do to yourself. And so, you know, especially when you think about like kids these days, they've got Wikipedia, they've got mobile phones, they've got completely different brains than we do. And we're sitting here trying to design a world for a whole bunch of kids who have completely different cognitive abilities and cognitive biases. And so we're kind of in the structure now. But this could be this year, this could be last year, this could be 100 years ago. We haven't changed the style of lecture as a mode. And I remember going to school and they were saying, okay, you have to learn all this stuff before you can do anything. It felt like I was being asked to read the whole encyclopedia from end to end before I was allowed to do anything. It's a weird thing because the Wikipedia is not only Wikipedia, but you've got all this information at your fingertips. But at MIT, we do science. So this is a polygraph machine this is an old technology, which is you can take galvanic skin response to measure sort of brain activity. We built Roz put a very small, lightweight, battery-powered one, and we stuck it on an MIT student for a week. And if you look here, it's kind of interesting because study, lots of activity, sleep actually, because of the dreaming and stuff, you get some activity, but look at class, you know? And what I love about this, if you go up to relax, they're actually thinking harder trying to relax, but somehow class has this ability to put you in a deep state of lecture meditation, you know? But I don't think this is actually new, by the way. I don't think you have to have a new cognitive framework to be bored in class. I think it's an old thing. So I think it's really important, and this is the slide I'll finish on, which is that we need creative learning. I think in the old days, or in many countries still today, in sort of mass production, post-industrial, pre-robot, pre-AI, you needed people who were obedient, could do repetitive tasks, weren't rebellious. But now, I mean, I think, by the way, I'm not afraid that the computers are going to take over the world or that we're going to lose our jobs. I just am afraid that we're not making people more creative, which is what you need, because the creativity is the thing that the computers can't do. All the repetitive jobs and all of the repetitive physical and mental jobs, I think, are going to be taken over by computers. So at the Media Lab, we talk about 4 Ps: projects, peers, passion, and play. We think that we know actually from 100 years of research that learning out of context doesn't work. If you're learning while you're doing something, you can learn something. But learning linear algebra with no examples is just, it's almost useless. So projects are extremely important. Peers, teaching each other is a great way to learn. And learning in groups. Learning from a teacher through a lecture is just not natural. Passion's extremely important, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later. And play. So when you're trying to be creative, if you put pressure on somebody and you give financial rewards, they will do simple tasks more efficiently, but they will not it will take them longer to do creative tasks. And so we're so used to putting pressure on people to be on time and obedient that we have stamped out creativity in our kids. And the rebellion, part of it is youth, but I think fundamentally our system of education, a system of work has stamped out creativity. And I think so, I want to sort of put rebellion and creativity into the same bucket. And I think that unless we're able to transform our children, our educational system, and our workforce to a more rebellious, robust system, we will lose our jobs to computers and robots, and that this is the only way we're going to survive. Thank you.